Do we actually need entertainment? We're currently spending between 4 and 6 hours a day on entertainment. We've essentially made it our part-time jobs to be entertained. But the question is, do we actually need this much entertainment? And to take it a step further, do we actually need entertainment at all? Over the past few years, I've been systematically removing entertainment from my life. And over the past 6 months, I've removed entertainment from my life nearly entirely. I expected going into this that my life would be less fun and less enjoyable. What I found was actually the opposite happened. My life became significantly more enjoyable. I had more fun than I'd ever had in my entire life, and I felt like I was truly living a fulfilling life. In fact, my life has become so much more enjoyable that I actually never want to go back to a life of constant entertainment. By the end of this video, you're going to understand why modern entertainment has failed us and what life would look like if you removed entertainment entirely. So in this video, we're going to cover what happens when we're constantly being entertained, were we actually designed for entertainment, and what happens if we remove entertainment entirely. So what happens if we're constantly being entertained? Well, here are 3 things that are going to happen if you are constantly being entertained. Firstly, you're going to be constantly distracted. Now, I noticed that I was doing this, especially when I was consuming a lot of entertainment, is I noticed that I would actually start to use entertainment to distract me. Whenever something started to get a little bit difficult, whenever I thought, wow, this task is a little bit outside of my reach, I would just go straight to entertainment. It would numb everything, it would keep me distracted from what I actually had to do. What happens if you constantly distract yourself is you're just constantly sweeping your problems under the rug. As we know, this is probably not the best way to deal with it, because when you're constantly sweeping things under the rug, you're constantly ignoring the big problems, is that those problems just get bigger and bigger and bigger, and they become an absolute mountain and an absolute nightmare to deal with. And if you're constantly distracting yourself, if you're always using this entertainment to kind of put the blinders on and avoid the real issues that you have in your life, you're just going to have a compounding effect of issues that go on, and it's all going to come crashing down on you all at once, and it's going to be an absolute disaster. I do not recommend it at all. The next thing that happens when you're constantly entertaining yourself, particularly using the modern forms of entertainment, is you're constantly receiving cheap dopamine. And this cheap dopamine, when I say cheap dopamine, what I'm talking about is dopamine that you receive that's not linked to any form of achievement. I call it achievement-free dopamine. If we think 200 years ago, 1,000 years ago, 5,000 years ago, the only way you could actually receive dopamine was through achievement, through accomplishing something that moved you forward and moved the people that you loved forward in life. For example, 2,000 years ago, the only way you could really receive super high levels of dopamine was doing something like killing an animal to feed your family, right? The act of killing an animal to feed your family would not only keep you alive, but it would keep your family alive, everyone you loved alive. Now, for good reason, your brain is going to give you a huge amount of dopamine for doing something like that. It's effectively going, good job, well done, here's a reward for doing that task. And now, you're going to constantly associate that good feeling, that spike of dopamine, with that task. The issue is, we've now created an environment where we can receive these huge spikes of dopamine, these huge good feelings, without actually doing anything at all. If you're, for example, sitting on your ass scrolling TikTok, or you're watching TV shows, or you're playing video games, you're not actually doing anything that progresses you and moves you forward in life. You're really just distracting yourself and entertaining yourself. But your brain doesn't know the difference, and your brain gives you huge amounts of dopamine from this. And when you receive that huge dopamine spike, all that's happening is you're now associating that action, sitting on the couch, playing video games, with a huge spike of dopamine. And the more you play video games, the more you get dopamine, the more you strengthen that connection. So over time, you're really just wiring your brain to say, keep playing video games because it makes you feel good. And the more you receive those massive spikes of dopamine, the harder it is for you to do anything else, because you're going to produce less dopamine. You stimulate your brain to produce so much dopamine that your brain goes, this is too much. I'm going to have to bring your dopamine down for absolutely everything. And when it does that, it makes things less enjoyable. And because things are less enjoyable, they're more difficult. And if everything is more difficult, all you're going to want to do is those easy things. And because you know, if I sit on the couch and play video games, That's incredibly easy. And my brain knows that if I play video games, I receive a spike of dopamine. All I'm going to want to do is just keep playing dopamine. And it's this vicious cycle of receiving dopamine from the entertainment, not from doing things that move you towards your goals, constantly receiving spikes of dopamine, reducing your overall dopamine levels, making it more difficult for you to work towards your goals. Overall, not a good place to be. And the third thing that happens is it ruins your motivation. As I said, when you get those peaks of dopamine, when you get those big spikes of dopamine from this entertainment that you're using, from things like watching TV, from things like playing video games, is that it gives you those huge spikes and your brain goes, that's too much dopamine, and it brings your dopamine down for everything. And with less dopamine, you're less motivated. Now, how does that work? Well, there was a study conducted where they would put rats in a cage. They basically altered their brains so that their brains produced zero dopamine. What would happen is those rats would not want to do anything whatsoever. They would just sit there in the cage and do nothing. The scientists would put food on the other side of the cage, and the rats would not go to the other side of the cage to get that food. The scientists would have to actually hand feed the rats, put food in the rats' mouths to keep them alive. The rats that they just left to their own accord, they would literally die of starvation. They would not move. They would not do anything. They had so little motivation, they couldn't even walk 20 centimeters to eat food. Now, if we think about this in our own lives, if we have such little dopamine that we don't really want to do anything, it's of course going to make it a lot harder for us to move towards our goals. If you have a big project that you're working on, it's so much harder to do that if you have no dopamine. You have no motivation, you don't want to do it. It's going to be a lot more difficult for you to do that task. Whereas if you had a huge amount of dopamine, it would probably be significantly more easy for you to do that task. So this constant stream of entertainment, all it's really doing is reducing our overall dopamine levels and making us less motivated. I remember when I was pretty young, I was probably 10 or 11 years old, we went on a holiday to Switzerland. I have family who live over in Europe. One of my family members lives in Switzerland, and we were there, and it's just an incredible place. It's Europe in summer. I'm from Australia, so you have to travel to the other side of the world to go to this amazing place. You know, beautiful weather, you got Lake Geneva, all this great stuff going on. But all I wanted to do was sit in my apartment and watch The Simpsons. I remember it so clearly. Every time we would go out, we literally just go for these amazing hikes to these beautiful places. You're hiking up the Alps. All I wanted to do was go home and watch The Simpsons. I'm on the other side of the world experiencing something I've never experienced before, but all I want to do is watch television, is to entertain myself. And it's because this entertainment gives us this huge rush of dopamine. It gives us this huge spike. It makes everything else less enjoyable, more boring, and just overall dull. So that begs the question, are we actually designed for entertainment? So let's look at how our brain reinforces us to do certain behaviors. Our brain releases dopamine on the action or anticipation of something pleasurable or enjoyable. So every time you watch that episode of your favorite show, you get a big release of dopamine. Every time you play that video game you really like, you release a bit of dopamine. Every time you scroll social media, you're getting a release of dopamine. But the purpose of dopamine in the first place is actually to reinforce us to do behaviors that moved us forward. As I mentioned earlier, the biggest dopamine hit you could get 1,000 years ago was something like killing an animal to feed your family. Things that were achievements that moved you forward in life. And as a result of those achievements, your brain gives you that dopamine hit. It reinforces you to do more of that action. But right now, we have all kinds of ways to receive this dopamine, receive this positive feeling without actually moving forward. We keep strengthening that pathway between entertainment and that good feeling of dopamine. And the more we watch entertainment, the more we entertain ourselves, the more we're spiking that dopamine, the more we're reinforcing that behavior. And over time, we've just created such a bulletproof reinforcement mechanism between doing something entertaining and receiving that hit of dopamine. And that's really why we spend 4 to 6 hours a day entertaining ourselves. It's because we get such an amazing rush. We've reinforced ourselves to want to entertain ourselves at all times that we think it's a good idea to spend 4 to 6 hours a day entertaining ourselves. Now, is it really good to spend 4 to 6 hours entertaining ourselves? Probably not. But because of the way we've constantly reinforced ourselves to do more things that are entertaining us and probably less things that are moving us towards our goals, that is why we're spending so much more time entertaining ourselves and so much less time working towards our goals. Now, if we think of the ways that people used to entertain themselves, thousands of years ago, it was probably things like telling stories around a campfire, singing, being around other people. The thing with entertainment, the way it used to be, was it was related to some sort of interaction with other people, strengthening bonds, strengthening relationships. Because strengthening relationships with other people is probably a goal for a lot of people. Having amazing relationships is a good part of your life. But right now, we are doing this entertainment for the most part by ourselves. We're not telling stories to other people. We're not surrounding ourselves with other people and cracking jokes and, dancing and singing. What we're doing is we're sitting on a couch and putting literally a piece of plastic 2 centimeters from your face and watching pixels move. That's our new form of entertainment. And in no way does that actually strengthen relationships. Does that actually build bonds? Does that actually make you closer to other people? So the forms of entertainment have significantly changed over time, but it's only very recently that we've actually seen entertainment which is completely devoid of building any sort of relationship with other people. You can entertain yourself now, and most people do entertain themselves now, without engaging with other people at all. It's literally, I sit down and I move my thumbs in a certain direction to change pixels on a screen, or I swipe my finger up to change pixels on a screen. It's basically all just watching pixels move. That is our new form of entertainment, and the reason that we do it is because, as I said, we're so strongly positively reinforced by those big spikes of dopamine that we just want to keep doing it over and over and over again. But we really haven't seen this before. We really haven't seen the idea of receiving entertainment without some sort of human interaction, without some sort of improvement in your relationships. And finally, we just have way too much free time right now. A lot of us are just spending an insane amount of time on this entertainment because we have nothing else to do with our time. We have no real goals or ambitions. We're not spending time with other people. We just have all this time that we're spending by ourselves. And if you're spending that time by yourself, your brain is probably going to want you to drift towards those things that are really stimulating. Your brain is always going to go for the pixels on the screen. It's always going to try and find that stimulating bit of entertainment. So there's no wonder that we spend so much time on entertainment when we're spending so much time by ourselves doing absolutely nothing. A lot of us, at best, would be working 7 hours a day if you have a full-time job. That's still 2 days on the weekend and then a huge amount of time before and after work that you can spend on entertainment. And most people do. Most people really are spending every single waking moment that they're not physically required to be working on entertainment. And it's just continually happening over and over again. We're just constantly entertaining ourselves with all the free time you have. And all that's happening is we're getting more free time. And with that extra free time, we're watching more and more entertainment. So I remember last year when I started working a full-time job. I was full-time in the 9 to 5. And what I noticed was I had very, very little free time. Because I was trying to build a business on the side, and because I also had ambitions to be in great shape, I would effectively wake up at 4 in the morning and then work all of the hours from 4 in the morning till 8 in the morning when I would get on my bike and cycle to work to get in at 9. And then I'd have my full day at work and I'd finish at 5 or 5:30. And then I'd cycle home, get home at 6:30. I would do my workout and then I would eat and I would go to sleep. And I effectively had zero entertainment through that entire time. It was literally wake up, work, cycle to work, cycle home, exercise, sleep, and then do it all over again. And what I thought I would notice is that I really hated it. It really sucked. It was really boring. But what actually happened was I really, really enjoyed life. It felt really rewarding when I was constantly moving towards my goals and putting the work in. And of course, I received huge results from the decisions I made last year because I spent so much time working on myself rather than distracting myself and entertaining myself. I actually got huge returns out of that. But I noticed through that period, even though it was a period where I worked harder than I'd ever worked in my life and spent less time entertaining myself than ever, I actually had more fun. I actually enjoyed myself more than I'd ever enjoyed myself, which is really something I did not expect whatsoever. But what actually does happen if you remove entertainment entirely? Well, if you're someone that spends huge amounts of time on entertainment, you scroll a lot of TikTok, you watch a lot of TV series, you play a lot of video games, you entertain yourself all the time. You're that kind of person who's up to 6 hours a day entertaining themselves. Well, if you removed entertainment completely, the first thing that's happened is you're going to get some withdrawals. Your brain is so used to every time something gets boring, every time something gets dull, going straight to that entertainment. But now that you don't have that, your brain is confused. It's like, what's going on? And because you were so used to giving yourself those huge spikes, those huge hits, your brain had to downregulate your dopamine receptors, reduce the amount of dopamine you released to compensate for how much you were receiving. So now you have very, very low baseline levels of dopamine. And now that you're not actually receiving any of that stimulation, you're going to feel pretty shit. You're not going to feel very good because for that first week at least, your brain hasn't had enough time to recalibrate to your new environment. And it's just a situation where you're producing very low dopamine and you have no stimulation and it's not going to feel very good. And to think that you've spent 10 years, 20 years just making all of these bad decisions, constantly stimulating yourself, to think that, oh, in 24 hours I can be back to normal is pretty naive. Obviously, it's going to take a bit of time, and those first 7 days are not going to be good. But slowly over time, what's going to happen is your brain is going to realize that it's no longer receiving stimulation from all of these artificial sources. It's no longer receiving that stimulation from you scrolling. It's no longer receiving that stimulation from you watching TV. It's no longer receiving that stimulation from you playing video games. Is that it's going to realize that your dopamine levels are too low. Your brain will start to increase your dopamine levels over time. It'll do this by increasing your dopamine production. It'll do this by improving the quality and the quantity of your dopamine receptors. By these three mechanisms, you're slowly going to increase your baseline dopamine over time. Now, what happens if you have a higher level of dopamine? Well, it effectively makes everything more enjoyable. Think about it. If you have more dopamine that is released for doing literally anything, then literally anything is going to become more enjoyable. So if you're trying to get in great shape, then going for that run is now going to be more enjoyable. If you're trying to build a business, then working on that business is going to become more enjoyable. And what happens if it's more enjoyable for you to go for a run? What happens if it's more enjoyable for you to work on your business? Well, you're probably going to actually work on your business more. You're probably actually going to go for runs more. And what happens if you work on your business more? Well, your business is probably going to grow. What happens if you go for runs more? Well, you're probably going to get in better shape. So in a very real way, if you've increased your dopamine baseline, you are going to feel better. You're going to have more motivation and you're going to get more done. The next thing that happens, which I think is the real superpower, I mean, this is insanely powerful, is that you're actually going to be rewarded for moving towards your goals. You remember how I told you about the reward mechanism in your brain, where if you complete an activity and you receive dopamine for that activity, your brain is going to start establishing a connection between doing that activity and actually receiving a reward. So it's going to actually feel good. And then you're going to go, well, I want to do more of that activity because it feels really good. Well, what happens if we've removed all of those spikes, all of those big peaks of dopamine that you got from your entertainment, and you only got those peaks from doing things like working, from doing things like exercising, doing things that move you towards your goals? Well, what's going to happen is you're now receiving spikes of dopamine for working towards your goals. Your brain is going to start associating good feelings with working towards your goals. So in a very real way, you've actually wired your brain to love working hard. Your brain is rewarding you for moving towards your goals, and it's a very, very good place to be in. Because when you're at a point where you're not receiving stimulation from any form of entertainment, is you're only getting those spikes from working towards your goals. And therefore, you're only reinforcing yourself to work towards your goals. And if you're only reinforcing yourself to work towards your goals, then the only thing you're going to crave is working towards your goals. And now that you have a higher dopamine baseline, everything is going to become more enjoyable. And you can see why I never really want to return to consuming a lot of entertainment. Because my life, when I was purely being reinforced for working hard, where everything was more enjoyable, is obviously going to be a much more fulfilling, much more satisfying life than somewhere where I'm constantly feeling terrible and the only way I can feel good is to get some form of artificial entertainment. As you can see, I'm very passionate about this topic because it has truly changed my life. If you guys are serious about rewiring your brain to love to work hard, then you can book a free call with us. I'll leave a link below this video. Otherwise, if you did get value out of this video, please like, please subscribe, and otherwise I will see you in the next video.